what hasn't been asked is why should black men support Republicans, right? Like if black men are not going to support her, that's everybody's choice. They can make an intelligent decision. Why should they support the Republican Party? For the most part, the Republican Party has never done any outreach to black community, to black men, for the most part, right? They've Democrats have taken the vote for granted. Republicans have ignored the vote. So why should black men speak to black men and the Republican Party?
Look, a couple things. First, you're right about the Republican Party. And this is my criticism. They really haven't tried to reach out to black voters, haven't tried to go and see if it's even possible to gain black voters. I think the black voters that vote Republican, they made their own internal decision to look at policy, look at politics writ large, and decide that they have certain beliefs that don't align with the Democrat Party, and they've decided to make that change for themselves. I would say in terms of where we are today, it's a couple things. First, the economy. We've already seen through the past two administrations when people were making more money, but also when their money was going further. And if you compare the current administration to the Trump administration, under the Trump administration, you made more money, but wages adjusted for inflation were actually up. So not only were you making more money, your money went further. Number two, under Donald Trump's policies, the wage gap was actually shrinking. In 2019, the wage gap between rich and poor was shrinking. That's very important for economic mobility, especially upward mobility. Number three, our immigration system is a mess. It's a serious problem, and border security is a serious problem. We talked about a lot of different issues, but something that is going to have a downward effect on so many communities. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, but so many communities across the country is when you have a massive amount of illegal immigrants in a city, in a town, in a county, and the illegal immigrants are getting hotel stays, food, cash cards, access to hospitals and emergency rooms. And yes, you have a lot of illegal immigrant children in the country who are in classrooms. Those kids are taking resources from our kids as Americans. Those hospitals are being overrun so Americans can't get care. And then there's the economic burden on cities and on states, which every state in the country is feeling. Number four, you take a look at our foreign policy. When Donald Trump was president, not only were there no new wars, we were getting out of wars. The world was much safer. Look at what's happening now. You could make the argument that we are on the verge of World War III. The Iranians are in active conflict with Israel. The Russians are in active conflict with Ukraine. And America has taken a position to support Ukraine and Israel. Could we get dragged into that? Yes, we could. If you just look at history, especially World War I, World War II, and other conflicts historically, that's how you get dragged into this stuff. Donald Trump has a record of actually not getting into conflicts, trying to get our nation out of that. Number five is cultural. And this is where I'm going to leave. Look, the modern Democrat Party, they do believe in this gender identity fluidity stuff. And look, if you're an adult and you decide you want to make a change with respect to your biology, that's fine for you as an adult. But to expose kids to that, I just can't get with that. I can't stand with that. And I do believe there's a lot of black people in America who do not agree with that. And I think you got to let kids be kids, let them go through puberty. We all went through fits and starts during that time. Let these kids mature, and if they choose to make a decision with their bodies at that point in the future, then they go and make that decision. But to short circuit the life cycle of puberty is just flatly wrong. I'll never agree with it, and that's not being anti people who change genders, but we have to respect puberty and adolescence and let kids grow up first and have them make those life-altering major decisions on their own. I know the Democrat Party does not support the position I just espoused, but I do believe that there's a lot of black voters in our country who do agree with the position I espoused. So those are some of the reasons why I think they should be voting Republican this election cycle.
Well, what about Republicans in your my fault? What about Republicans in your state that want to take slavery out of the history taught to public school students in Florida?
This is a great question. I'm glad you brought this one up. So what happened was when they were going through, I think it was the AP course, actually. It was the AP African American Studies course I was coming into Florida. And so what the governor objected to, there was actually 4 modules in this course. The first 3 modules were the history aspects of African American Studies AP. The governor and the legislature was fine with that. The 4th module was when you got into some of the studies aspects. And I don't have them all committed to memory right now, but that actually did not deal with historical aspects of Black people in the United States. That dealt with college level theoretical studies associated of the impacts of the history. And that's in a couple of those modules. That's what the governor and the legislature objected to. So they sent that back to College Board with their objections. College Board actually came back with a revised course that the last I heard, the governor and the legislature approved of, and then you move forward.
I listened to everything you said about why you think that Black men should vote Republican, but I'm thinking of the timeline here, because it feels like every time we talk about Republican or Democrat, it starts Democrat at Obama and then it starts with Trump. But during the early 2000s, when George Bush was in administration at the time, I guess you're choosing your party. Are we not in wars, right? Are we not in conflicts? Is there not a financial crisis that's happened? Yet you still chose to be a Republican. So I'm wondering if that thought process then is the same thought process now.
Well, I mean, for me, when George W. Bush was president, I was apolitical. So I really started paying attention to politics during the financial collapse of '08. That's when I really, I guess, kind of started developing my own worldview. My path to politics was really about political thought and political theory, not modern day Republican, Democrat. This one's good, that one's bad. I never looked at it that way. I'm probably what you would call a classical conservative. I believe that the federal government has a couple of jobs. They should do those jobs and only those jobs. I don't believe there should be a lot of mission creep. I think the government does have to live under a sound money principle where there is only a certain amount that you spend. You don't overspend even though you want to. That's just how I feel, and that's my personal politics. And so when I started going down that line from an economic perspective, what I realized that I agreed much more with modern Republicans than modern Democrats. That's me. I think if you talk about the wars under George W. Bush, I didn't agree with that stuff. I just didn't agree with it. I think a lot of people at the time were trying to figure out, why are we in these? But they attacked us on 9/11. And so like most Americans, that's kind of how I thought about it. But now being a member of Congress and even serving at the state legislature, my view is we should be strong militarily. We should keep strong bonds with our allies. But to just jump into conflicts, we should be very leery of that. I think my personal view on military uses of the military and foreign policy is that if we're going to go in and, have to handle business with the enemy, we do it quickly, we do it overwhelmingly, and then we go home. I think long-term nation building is actually quite disastrous for any country or any society. I think that's when people start to say, well, why are we spending all this money in all these different places? What are we getting out of it, et cetera? And you really lose the will of voters back home. So I really don't subscribe to that. I would say the party today versus the party when George W. Bush was president, in a lot of respects, is a very different party. We're a party much more focused on working families, on the price of goods, on people's take-home pay. We're not as concerned about corporate America, just to be blunt with you. And if you actually look at the FEC and who they give money to, corporate America, the Chamber of Commerce, they actually give more money to Democrats than they give to Republicans. Your multi-national corporations really don't mess with us. They don't fool with us that much. We've really become a working class party, and we become a party that does believe in peace through strength, but a party that does believe in peace overall. We're really not trying to be in a lot of conflicts, because those are somebody's son, somebody's daughter that goes into these conflicts and fights. Typically, they're poor Americans who sign up for the military that go into these conflicts. And so, if we're going to use our military, we want it to be overwhelming force, not to put our people, at harm's way. And so that's kind of like where the party is now. That's my philosophy, but that's also where the party is. And, if you talk to Republicans on Capitol Hill, not through sound bites in the network news, because that stuff is clippy and a lot of times it's misleading. But when you talk to them, you have these conversations, whether they're on Capitol Hill or at the state level. In a lot of states, you're starting to hear more and more that the psychology of Republicans today is still about limited government, still about lowering taxes and less regulation, but it's also about making sure that working families have an ability to stand on their feet and to be able to build for their family and to have more ladders. I guess I would say to have more ladders to access our economy, which is why when I talk about regulations and energy and tax policy, its goal all the time is to make sure people have more ladders to be able to access the success capabilities in America.